What's happening, people? Welcome back to another podcast of the Millionaire Travels. For today's podcast, I have with me an Amazon bestseller, a design genius, ex-head of design at Unacademy, and the founder of 10K Designers. Abhinav Sikara is the person with me today. Thank you, Abhinav, for doing this podcast with me. You, along with Varun, Tanay, Abhinav, and Shashank, have been revolutionizing the edtech space, if I may say that, in India, and I'm super grateful for that.
Thanks, Ayush. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me here. I'm looking forward to having an awesome conversation. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So, starting with networking
Hmm.
being being with the right people is super important. As I've seen stories of you, and Varun also says that it's about the five people around you that matters a lot. So you met people like Varun in college, there's Shashank, and you guys did smart things together, right? So for a
Hmm.
21-year-old or a 20-year-old who is smart and ambitious, how do you think he can network and add value and be important, to people like you on a personal level?
Great question, dude. I love that we're jumping straight into the topics.
Yeah.
I think what's super interesting is one of the reasons people um, love the idea of going to college to network
Yeah.
is because you don't have to intentionally do it. It's sort of networking happens to you, which
Correct.
is you're in classroom with a bunch of people,
Yeah.
you're in a certain hostel with a bunch of people, and by default the environment is made in such a way that you get to know.
100%.
But as we can see that that's not the best strategy. Like right now, for example, you don't have campuses, you have to learn online, and you're sort of seeing the breakdown of the points where like the fun parts about college which are not able to happen.
Right.
So I think the way to look at this is that there is networking that just happens to you based on the environment you're in. And the other is intentional networking, which is you actually go out there and make an effort.
Yeah.
Not enough people do the second variety, which is intentional. But I think one of the best ways to do it, I think this is something that you probably have some idea of already, since you have created this YouTube channel and the
Right.
podcast.
Yeah.
It's finding these opportunities for other people to get to know who you are. Now, I can give you one
Mm.
example from my own life around this, which
Yeah.
is very early on when I used to go to conferences, like design conference, not really design conferences, but mostly startup conferences, um, or a lot of startup events in Bangalore. It would be weird for me to network because I sort of had to establish this common ground. I
Yeah.
had to find people who, we had some shared this thing. And,
Correct. Yeah.
I am a little bit more of towards on the introvert side. So it was much harder for me to do it as well.
100%.
And
Yeah.
eventually I was like, hey, maybe it's not worth it going to these events. But all of that changed for me once I started putting out content on my YouTube channel, which is now, this might sound funny to say, but at an event, people would come to me instead, where they would say, hey, I
Okay.
saw your video.
Yeah.
And now that initial barrier was broken because they now know something about me. So I
Correct.
don't have to
Yeah.
make too much of that effort to say, hey, this is who I am.
Mm.
And then I could get to know more about them. So I
Mm.
think the best way to do it, intentional networking, is to find out these opportunities like a podcast, YouTube channel, you have a blog where you are trying to actively share more about what you're working on, what kind of stuff you're learning, such that the next time you meet somebody, there is some chance that they've already met you, or forget physical events. Putting this kind of content out, a lot of people are going to get in touch with you over email, over DMs, or
Correct.
just in the comments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now they know a certain part of you or what they should reach out to you for, versus before they had no reason to reach out to you because they don't know what you're about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's one of the best ways, creating that web of content, like your digital footprint.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that you have to actually, like in my opinion, start as early as possible. Don't wait for a future date,
Yeah.
because it takes a long time to slowly
That's true.
build up.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was basically the first test that happens between two people. But okay, this happens for once, but how can a 20-year-old, add value to lives of people like you? Because we don't have a lot of leverage, right? You are established people, you're doing pretty good. There's not a lot that we can do at the level that we are. So in that sense, what do you think we can do?
Good question. So let's go even deeper on that. One of the, when you typically look at personal branding type of content online, or when you look at the kind of stuff Gary Vee puts out, or a lot of people like this, it's typically 1 to N stuff. which is I am this person and I'm putting this out to multiple people. And that
Got
is
it.
one of the default ways of doing it. But tricky part with that is if nobody knows who you are, or if people don't have a reason to follow you, putting out this one-to-one content where you're broadcasting your life, there isn't that much interest in it. And
Yeah.
typically when you're starting out, you are not really trying to reach the peers, you're trying to reach much above. You're trying to reach people who you want to build relationships with people who can get you to higher and higher levels. And those
True.
people aren't really watching vlogs online or somebody who just started YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That would be useful maybe later, which is people really want to see your behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But early on, people might not see the value in that. So I think one way you can do that is instead of one-to-N stuff, which is broadcasting, try to figure out more one-to-one stuff, which is instead of putting it out for a general audience, if there are certain types of people you want to form relationships with, that's what I typically call this, which is you need some excuse to reach out to them. And these people typically, let's say it's a CEO, they're really busy with their stuff.
Yeah.
You have to figure out some way you can give them value. And now the tricky part here is that you have no idea what does give them value. But then
exactly.
The two types that exist here, one is to N, you can keep experimenting. You can put whatever you want.
Yeah.
1:1 is a much more personalized approach. This is where a make or break can happen, which is like I saw this one example recently that really struck me. There's this designer, Ran Segal, and he does a lot of design related stuff. He's on YouTube and Instagram as well. So he had shared the screenshot of how when he was a young designer, he had reached out to much bigger designers like Chris Do and a bunch of people. And he had basically said, hey, I want to work with you. I want to create content for your Instagram. Here's 40 samples that I've made. Right?
Wow.
He made 40 videos and carousels. He's like, here's 40 of them. Feel free to use them if you want to start. You can literally start posting these today if you want. And if you want to work, you want to work together, make more. Now you have an example of my work that you can use.
Yeah.
So what I really liked about that approach was he didn't have to do 40. I think even if he had done 5 or 10, that probably would have been enough.
Yeah, 100%.
But now what he's done is now this guy who sent the email, he's not just another person who has reached out.
Yeah.
He's this person who's shown high intent, a high level of personalization, and some amount of proof of work. And his goal with this was to form a relationship, but he figured the best way to do this was to probably freelance for these people.
Yeah.
But then instead of trying to convince them that, hey, are you looking for a freelancer? Is this good? He decided to pretend they were already a client, do the work and send it over to them. So now the tricky part about this is you can't do this for everybody.
Exactly.
You can only maybe do this for
it's not scalable.
This is very time consuming. Definitely not scalable. But then I think the tricky part is if you really want to punch above your weight class, which is you want to go much higher, you have to figure out these kind of unique ways that don't really scale.
Correct. Yeah, that was helpful. Like, for example, a podcast. All right. So the next question, it's a little different, not related to marketing at all or networking. So how to become an action-driven person rather than a knowledge-driven person? So there are a lot of people with a lot of knowledge, but they just don't take action. So how do you propose someone to be an action-driven person?
So very interestingly, I made a tweet storm just today, like just before our call. I mean, not knowing we're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
But basically, the way I think about it is, I was thinking about it more from the angle of traditional learning versus the learning companies today. Just traditional traditional online learning. So let's say Udemy, Skillshare courses.
Okay. Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have things like Avalon Pro Leagues, which you've been a part of. We've got 10K designers, which are very live learning platforms. And now the main difference between these two is that watching videos, just watching somebody else do it, is not really enough. Which is you watch somebody, design a web page, or you watch somebody code, you get this illusion that, okay, I know how to do it now. But you don't know how to do it till you actually try it.
Yeah.
But these kind of systems don't have that accountability built in. They might have something where, upload your project after you're done, but they don't really create that accountability to do it.
Makes sense.
So I think the way to become, so I think that's the trap here, which is the more you learn, you're supposed to be making progress. But if you don't apply it, it's almost like a leaky bucket. It's just you're filling it up, but it's leaking out.
Hmm.
So to really be
100%.
action driven rather than just knowledge driven is anytime you're learning, it's best if you can try to figure out some output from it. So make it a project that you can actually publicly publish. What this does is instead of now just learning these concepts and moving on to learning a new concept, and by the time you reach the third concept, you've forgotten the first concept. You're not taking all this learning time and you're creating an artifact at the end of it. This is something that you can then use to also build your portfolio if you need it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think project-based learning is probably one
Makes
way you can
sense.
do that.
Keeps you accountable, right? Correct.
Definitely,
So
definitely.
we all know that the bliss of ignoring and the pain of knowledge. Why does human brain always chooses the the easier option? Ignore, chodo.
Mm. Mm. I mean, it's a very interesting question because depending on who you ask, you're going to get a very different answer.
Yeah.
Like I feel like maybe Prakhar would give you a more evolutionary biology answer
He
here.
will just keep on going for 15 minutes.
Yeah. Varun might give you something a very biological answer, which is, hey, these are your neurons. This is how this works.
Yeah.
I think my answer around this, I would say it's more around. Wait, let me rephrase it. Can you just repeat the question? What was
Sure, sure.
how did you frame it?
So bliss of ignoring and the pain of knowledge. People choose the bliss of
Hmm.
ignoring and not the pain of knowledge.
Hmm. I think it's very tricky because with something like knowledge, especially the knowledge which makes you feel like you've made progress, which is, let's say, this project-based learning idea, there's a very big learning curve to it, which is whenever you start off with something new, you're definitely going to suck in the beginning of it. You're definitely going to suck, and it's going to be like
No
this
doubt.
slow curve.
Yeah, yeah.
And eventually, you're going to get to a point where the momentum and the excitement of making something
Yeah,
carries you forward.
yeah, yeah.
But till you get there, you're never going to know. So I sort of feel
Hmm.
like the biggest reason people are sort of stuck in that phase of ignorance is either because they've never had a experience which took a long time, and then once they reached that, they were like, oh shit,
Got it.
or they feel they never crossed that X on the graph after which it gets better.
Correct.
So they quit too early.
Yeah,
And I think at some level, this becomes a negative loop, which is if you do something and you don't succeed, if you quit early, it affects your success for the next one, which is now you feel a
makes
little bit more
sense.
demotivated,
Yeah,
then a
yeah,
little bit more and a little bit more. And it creates this negative momentum rather than positive momentum.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
There
so
is where all
I think
the
the best
never
way to,
give up comes in.
definitely. So the best way to do that, I'm not sure. Maybe it is to find one thing that gives you that confidence such that you're like, hey, this, like, let's say marketing used to be very difficult for me before, and now I figured it out. Having that experience in life makes you more confident in other things, which is, hey, I
Yeah,
was able
yeah.
to figure it out before, there's no reason why I won't be able to figure it out next time.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it's definitely subjective to person as well. But right.
So,
All right. So coming back to the networking question, this is a little it's a little different question. For example, so being an Avalonian, being old member of Avalon, we know that MBA sucks and all that, and the story that we believe in that MBA is not worth it. I also believe in that, but again, it comes down to the networking aspect of things. The campuses, the people there are super smart, and it's not easy if you don't do an MBA there. You cannot network with them, and also not in that scale. मतलब वो 5-6 लोग
yeah.
मान लो या 10 लोग मान लो वो नहीं हो सकता on one basis में से घर पे बैठ के. What to do about that part of networking if you don't want to do an MBA specifically?
True. I think one very interesting byproduct of this of lockdown, as well as now people forced to to working remotely, is a
Yeah.
lot more people are setting up these sort of physical infrastructure, which is, like, I know friends of my own who are like, hey, we're working from home, why don't we just rent an Airbnb in like um, Mangalore, Sakleshpur, like smaller areas which still have great internet, and the 5 of us or the 10 of us, why don't we work from there? I know people who've ditched their office or co-working space, and they've just gotten a really good villa instead. Um,
Wow.
so the point I'm getting to is we're sort of seeing that decoupling of the college experience in some sense, which is college has this one part which is learning. It has this other part which is like so let's say the classroom experience, and then there's the hostel experience, which is again totally different. And then it's the partying and hanging out experience or the fest experience that's totally different.
Yeah.
We're seeing that decouple. So instead of going to college where you get all three of them, you're seeing something like, let's say, Avalon Pro Leagues or 10K Designers, the design program, which is, hey, we'll take care of some of the learning and the community aspects. You're seeing some of these companies like, in fact, there's one company called the Experience Company. They're starting this thing called Tribe House, which is they're saying, hey, we've rented an entire resort in Sakleshpur, and it's 24 people only. It's a month-long experience. You come here and you work. So they are sort of decoupling then the hostel experience, which is you get to spend these 30 days with strangers, and by the end of it, you're good friends. So I think at some level, the key to this is, you can definitely post stuff online. It helps increase your footprint on the internet. But you need some shared experiences. And some of these shared experiences are things like these cohorts, which are still online. And a lot of these shared experiences, we're seeing the rise of physical shared experiences, which is, I think, a lot more hostels, like backpackers hostels, for example,
100%.
are going to become workcation hubs, which is before it was a minority that was remote workers, and now it's the majority. So I think we're going to see that kind of restructuring.
There's also this program called Jagrati Yatra, if you know, the train thing.
True.
So yeah, that's also a great. That makes a lot of sense. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. So coming back to design part of things, being a designer, you must understand human psychology and behavior. And there's this show, Social Dilemma, on Netflix, which told us about a lot of problems that's happening with the tech giants in Silicon Valley and all that. How they manipulate brains with design. So do you think it's ethical on the part of the tech companies to design such things and make people do certain actions, and we don't even know about it? This is the first part of the question, and the second part is, what's your personal take on this solution of this?
I think when people think about design, they think, like, at least people who are beginners or haven't started, they think more about the output that they're producing, which is like the actual graphic design posters or the screens that they're doing. And it's hard for them to think beyond these screens into what are the systems they're creating, and these systems, how do they interact with the world. So I think the interesting part is that design is really closely tied with business incentives, which is, let's say, the business model for a certain company that you're working for was to sell cycles. There's nothing wrong there, which is people pay you money, you give them a cycle. They come back to you for servicing costs, for repairs, and that's your business that runs.
100%.
But then now when you have incentives where people are not paying you anything, like let's say Facebook is free to download, WhatsApp is free to download, but they're not paying you any money up front. So if you can't get the money in the front, you have to get something else, which is now your attention. Which they're taking in some sense. So as a designer, then what do you do? Because it's very easy to say, oh, Facebook is unethical, but most designers are given the opportunity, they'll be like, yeah, I do want to work at Facebook as a designer. Right? So as an individual, what you can do is you can think about the thing that I'm designing. What's the full life cycle there, which is I'm designing these screens. These screens are used by people in this context, and then this changes their life in that way. This is how they pay for it. This is how they make money from it. And overall, the better the product is, what is the outcome out there? Versus something like Facebook, it's not direct money, so it's advertising, and you need more. You need people's attention. Like now, you created this machine which it needs to keep being fed. So I would say I really like to break down the persuasion part of it and the addiction part of it, which is any business does need to be persuasive.
Sure. Yeah.
You can't just say we make cycles and just sit there and be cool about it. You need to actually
100%.
convince people to buy.
Bilkul.
You convince people that your product or service is worth it.
Kharido,
So it definitely needs to be persuasive. You can't just sit there and be like, "Haan, theek hai, buy it if you want." So design definitely needs to be persuasive, but addictive is something that only happens in a small percentage of cases, which is like with something like Facebook, that at a small scale probably would not have made a difference. But then in a VC capitalistic model, you have to grow that. So it's definitely not. So to the ethics of it, or what's the actual solution for this? I think my guess, my prediction, or not prediction, but my guess is that people are going to be moving to more sustainable models, which is, if you look at media, advertising as a model, people know it now doesn't work. In the sense that media houses realize that we have to rely on clickbait to make people do this.
Yeah.
And when you play that out, it results in this dilution.
Sure.
So a lot of new media companies are moving to subscription models where they don't have to play that game. So I think it's more of it's a very cyclical, systemic kind of thing, which is newer companies might move to better models, which leads to these better incentives while designing. But the solution for Facebook doing it, I'm not sure. Like Facebook, I don't think they can stop at this point.
So what do you think about the subscription model for Facebook? Like option that pay $100 a year or something like that, and we'll not show you ads.
Yeah. I think somebody ran the numbers for this. You can find this information online, which is they found out how much money does Facebook make from a person in the US versus a person in India. And then they divided that by 12 and they said, instead of this money, can you just pay us this money upfront?
Yeah.
And in the US, this number was around like $140 per person, if I remember correctly.
Per month?
Per year.
I
think it was per year. And that comes to maybe $10 or $12. And in India, the amount was like less than 10, I think.
10 rupees.
Right?
$10.
$10. Less than $10 a month.
$10.
And then if you divide that, it's like 1 point something dollars a month. So then it came down to, okay, so if they did do that, the value of the value of an eyeball, a set of eyeballs in the US is very different from emerging countries. So even if they did it in the US, it makes sense. But in India, people don't like paying for virtual goods. I think in terms of the economy, we're not that mature yet in terms of a digital economy. So counterintuitively, the solution is actually to start paying for services. Because if you pay upfront, then there are less hidden incentives to make money from you on the back end. So it almost needs to come at a very systemic level where we need to start accepting the fact that, hey, we should not pirate this kind of stuff, or we should pay for software whenever possible. And then once the behavior changes, I think the tech companies are then going to react accordingly, which is you are seeing, like, with this whole idea of next billion users, which are coming from India and Southeast Asia, we are seeing that there's a lot of companies being started who are made just for this. So for example, there's a company called Meesho or Dukaan or Khata Book. They're all very India specific companies going after even tier 2, tier 3 users. So I think it's a matter of maturity as well, which needs to come in the ecosystem. So it'll take 100%. A few cycles, I think, for something to change.
All right. So we're talking about design. So can you just let the audience know about 10K designers as well? What does 10K designers do? How is it different from Avalon Meta? What is your vision and all that?
So 10K designers is an online cohort-based program, which is, it opens up a couple of times a year. As part of this, it's about 30 or 40 people. That's one of the cohort t-shirts that I'm wearing.
Oh, wow.
There's about 30 or 40 people, it's a 3-month program where you go from beginner, or let's say we have college students, we have people in the middle of their careers, people who want to switch into design. In those 3 months, you build a portfolio and you learn design, and then you do a final project and you get a job as a designer. So the whole idea is, it's like, instead of watching videos online and figuring it out yourself, all these incentives that we talked about of active, passive, project based, it's all of that baked into this one experience where you get to network as well. You get to learn and build your portfolio alongside. And it is very similar, in fact, the model to Avalon Pro Leagues. So Varun and I, we've written the book together. We went to college together. Now I'm an angel investor in Avalon Meta. So a lot of these things we do talk about on a regular basis. But in general, I think 10K designers, the future for it is we're just figuring out how do we get more into design and product education. So in general, for people who are watching, if you're considering becoming a designer, I would say checking out maybe my YouTube channel first.
Sure, I'll share the
which
handles.
has like a free, it's got like a free design crash course. But besides that, if you want to switch into design, that's probably something you can consider.
All right. So, what was the situation when you left the job at Unacademy? We had design of Unacademy and started 10K designers from scratch. What was the feeling?
In terms of timing, it's very interesting timing. It was just before
COVID happened.
So I was there for about 2.5 years, built the design team from scratch. I was one of the early employees there.
Yeah, I think 41, right? 41st.
Yeah. And in fact, somebody was messaging me today saying, what does it feel like to see Unacademy at IPL? Which is like, oh, it's an Unacademy sixer. And it's, of course, definitely very interesting to see. But in general, my whole idea around it was, after spending 2.5 years there, I got to see a lot of these things we're talking about with live learning, with online education. I got to actually build those systems at scale, which is early on, Unacademy was just a YouTube channel, like way back.
Then
eventually they created their own platform. This platform then had like free content out there. And, they able to build this free platform to scale as well. And then looking at this data, looking at the future direction that the whole space was taking, we then took this bet on live learning as a medium. And today Unacademy Plus is like one of the biggest live learning platforms in the world. So my team and I were able to actually see that evolution and actually build these systems. So for me now, it was definitely a great time. I had a great time there. But what I wanted to do next, the bigger challenge for me was, I know that we're currently in the middle of like a massive change when it comes to online education. And I feel like COVID at some level has only accelerated this.
Sure.
So
100%.
I realized that this was probably the best time for me to say, hey, like, I have all of this knowledge of how the industry works, have some of this experience of building it, but can I take that entire playbook and apply it to design? And in fact, that's one of the reasons I've invested in Meta as well. Of course, because Varun and I are friends, but also so that I can have a part in, definitely. So I can have that part in building Meta up as well.
So when you left the job, was COVID going on, or?
It was just before. So it was like maybe Jan 2020.
So when this COVID happened, were you like, shit, galti?
No, I was really happy, dude, because I didn't have to, I think the biggest challenge was people had to switch to remote like very suddenly. And a lot of these systems for remote working didn't exist. So I was actually very happy that I had quit before, just so that I didn't have to spend that time remote learning. And by the time the lockdown procedures were in place, like I had been locked down in my room for about 2 or 3 months already. Like busy working on stuff. So it was a easier transition for me.
Got it.
But so, I think the biggest, the actual question there is more around, it's more about, it is definitely hard leaving a company at that scale. Like Unacademy today is worth about $1.4 billion. Education unicorn now.
They just raised another round, right?
Yes. So they raised, I think,
$100
most
million.
recent was the SoftBank round.
Yeah.
So it's definitely difficult leaving a unicorn at this level.
Mm. Got it. All right.
Yeah.
So coming back to 2021 year old perspective, so I'm sure you receive a lot of DMs of people who are smart, who are very driven for sure, and they're asking you, give me this opportunity, give me that opportunity. I'm trying a lot, but I'm still not able to figure stuff out. And you, on some level, relate to it, but as an individual with your own stuff going on, you cannot really do a lot. So, what would be your advice to those people who are smart, who are driven, who are trying out things, but it's still not working out for
Yeah. I would say if the goal of this person, whoever these people are, is to really do something of their own, it's a good idea doing that with somebody else. So, for example, for me, building the startup, a lot of these things I got to learn while I was at Unacademy.
them?
So for
Makes
2021
sense.
year olds, I would say seek out these experiences that are not publicly advertised anywhere, that are not LinkedIn job posts, that you won't find in the public, but they exist almost invisibly. So as a 2021 year old, it's very interesting if you can figure out how to tap into these kind of opportunities that exist. And the tricky part is, if everybody could do it, everybody would have done it already. So if you are able to figure out what these opportunities are, you sort of then have that competitive advantage as well, which is not everybody can do it.
Right. God, that's the hard truth, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the biggest strength? What do you consider key? Yeah, this is the strength that is setting me apart from everybody else.
I would say for me, I I think I realized at some point that I didn't want to just do design. And since then, I've just been trying as much as possible to not get locked into a particular role, which is I don't want to just be this design manager who manages a team. I don't want to just be a video editor who goes full in on videos. I don't want to lock myself into a role, because then, I don't know, maybe it's a part of like my personality, but I always want to keep doing more things. I would rather be a generalist than a specialist.
Okay.
So I would say what has really helped me is that this kind of mindset has helped me adapt to changes much faster, which is I'm not really comfortable in my own skin, which is I'm always trying to move away
You're
from.
not comfortable in the
Like I
comfort
get,
zone.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I enjoy design, but then
Yeah.
if you told me I have to be a designer, like I can't imagine being a designer at, let's say, 40 years of age. I just can't imagine that. So I'm like, okay, like what I have now is great, but it's temporary. I need to figure something else out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. All right. And coming back to weakness, what is your biggest weakness? What do you consider is that ये चली जाए तो फिर तो no problem.
Yeah. I think the biggest limit on my growth right now is definitely creating systems for myself, which is so far, like with design,
Yeah.
especially having done design so long,
Yeah.
it's easy to get into this perfectionist kind of mindset, which
Okay.
is like when you are designing a screen, for example, like talking very practically,
Mm-hmm.
you actually have to be pixel perfect, which is
Yeah.
it can't be 3 pixels off, 2 pixels off. You have to
Bilkul.
actually be totally methodical there. And that carries over into a lot of other parts of your life, which is you aim for perfection in things where it's just not needed. And what this results in is that
Got it.
either you focus on the wrong things because you're over optimizing them, or you're not able to trust other people to take on those processes, or you are getting too
Makes
over
sense.
involved in the smallest things. But then this prevents you from moving up to a higher level. So I think for me, more than a learning process, it's been an unlearning process where I'm trying to say, okay, I need to do that in design,
Yeah.
but can I let go? And how do I create more opportunities to let go of things?
Got it. Do you think this is stopping you from the best version of yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, one way I've been one way I've been able to let go is
Yeah.
also creating a lot of these systems that do it for me. By systems, I just mean um, certain processes around, things like content creation, around personal productivity, and being more action driven, which is if I spend, let's say, 10 hours on something,
Yeah.
but it gets no response,
Yeah.
then it doesn't matter that I spent 10 hours. Even if I had spent 1 hour, it would have been okay. So I need to I'm now trying to balance, or not now, but I have been trying to balance the sort of ROI of each thing that I do.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Going back in retrospect, what do you think? Like, where was the turning point, or it was always up and up? Where do you think, like, yeah, यहाँ पे था फिर यहाँ आ गया?
Yeah.
Where was it? The
Yeah.
J curve, the hockey stick curve.
I always think that, so in college, so I took computer science in college because I just watched The Social Network and I was like, this is definitely what I want to do in life. First year of college, got a really bad GPA, or like 6 something. And I was like, okay, it's because, first year is not really computer science. It's general subjects.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Second year was computer science. I roughly got this thing again. And around that time, that was when Varun and I started doing a lot of this freelancing stuff, selling t-shirts, these kind of side hustles. But I think that was a turning point for me because I realized, hey, this path that I'm on, this game that I'm playing, I'm not suited for it, which is the best I can do if I keep, even if I get my GPA up, is just sit for placements and then what? I don't really want to code. Like coding at this point, I realized that, hey, design seems to be more interesting. Like designing products is at actually a higher layer above how do you exactly code it. So I always think that if I actually had gotten a good GPA, I wouldn't be forced to, learn design, go out on my own, start freelancing. I would have probably taken the paths because it was probably the easiest at that point.
Yeah.
But since that didn't happen, I had to figure out, okay, if this is not the game that I'm playing, which is GPA placements, what is the other game that I can play? And that is when we started going deeper into freelancing, into design. So for me, the real turning point came when I was actually able to make money. Because at this point, I could stand up properly to my parents and be like, yo, listen, like, don't worry about this placements, TCS, Infosys, whatever. Like, what I'm doing
Check my
right now, I'll
bank
be able to
account.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You're like,
Makes
okay,
sense.
it's working now. And then that gives you this confidence. It is a form of external validation, but then you do need it at some level.
Yeah. Financial freedom makes you independent. Got it.
Yeah.
Right. So the final 3 questions that I ask everybody on the podcast is that 3 books and podcasts and life lessons. So if you can share 3 books, if you don't read books or something like that, then you can share documentaries, whatever you want to.
So let me start with podcasts. Actually, let me let me think a little about this first.
Sure.
I don't have good recommendations, dude. So let me tell you this. In general, with books, I actually do read a lot. Okay. But one thing I've realized now is instead of reading complete books, most books only have 1 or 2 core ideas.
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer of like YouTube summaries for books. So my recommendation would actually be a YouTube channel, which is this channel called Productivity Game.
Okay.
And what they do is these 7-minute animated summaries on some great books. So I would suggest for books, that's what I would suggest.
All right.
For podcasts, I would say let me suggest a certain podcast episodes that I really like. Sure. So definitely I do listen to Joe Rogan a lot. But I think one podcast episode that I really loved was his episode with Paul Stamets, which is Paul Stamets is the mushroom guy. So more than tech or design, his analogies around how mycelium and how mushroom networks actually are in nature actually changed the trajectory for me in many ways because I was able to apply a lot of those learnings to life and business. So for some reason, it really resonated with me. So that's one of my favorite episodes. Besides that, there's a bunch of podcasts I listen to as well, but I don't have any specific recommendations. Um,
Zero.
in terms of, yeah, I'm very the problem, right? The biggest problem is that I have a huge appetite for information, which
Okay.
is I consume too much stuff. Not all
Mm-hmm.
the time, but I have
Yeah.
waves where I consume too much stuff. So
Mm.
it's almost like I can't pinpoint a couple
Yeah.
things, because to me, eventually everything starts melting together.
Mm.
All of the stuff starts melting together. Only certain ideas stand out. And these ideas, I'm not exactly sure where they came from, because it's like a
Yeah.
mix
Yeah.
of sources.
All right. You can share it in the life lessons, 3 life lessons.
Yeah. Life lessons for me, definitely number one has been try to become, what I like to call this is become a sovereign individual, because which is, as much as possible, can you become a person that works with least dependencies? Can you figure out your financial freedom on your own? Can you
Mm.
figure out your own distribution channels, let's say, for your content?
Mm.
Can you figure out a life for your own where you are not held hostage by certain systems?
Yeah. Makes
So
sense.
number one is that. My number two life lesson is related to the first, which is try to figure out your financial freedom very early on. Because I feel like a lot of these, whenever you hear a lot of these ideas and theories around how things are supposed to be,
Mm.
um, you're not able to actually go out and apply them fully if you don't have a strong financial base.
Yeah.
So I would say that should probably be the first thing you do before you try to get into these spaces of figuring stuff out. And
Mm.
whatever way that is, personally, I would say freelancing is a great way, because it's shorter cycles and you can sort of figure that out by yourself.
Sure.
But definitely try to get financially independent. And the third lesson I would give is, the world we live in today, we live on the internet. We're spending more time on the internet sometimes, some days, than the real life. So instead of working in isolation, where you're very secretive, you're like, this one piece of information that I know, nobody else should know it. Or I'm going
Mm.
to work perfectly on this, and 3 years later, I'll do a perfect launch.
Yeah.
Right? These idealistic ideas, somehow you have to figure out a way to let them go. Because the world we live in today, it's a world of abundance in some sense, of when it comes to information. Um, and you need to create these feedback cycles for yourself, where instead of building in isolation, you are
Yeah.
building in public somehow, where you can get feedback as early as possible. You can start getting users, or let's say if it's a product you're building, you can start getting users and start building your brand as early as possible. Or if you're just a 21 year old,
Yeah.
you can start compounding faster, which is you can start building your content base. You can start building your personal brand, the work that you put out. And I think that will really make a big difference.
Got it. All right. Thank you so much, Abhinav, for doing the podcast. To all the listeners, I have listed on all of his handles: YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Also, check out 10kdesigners.com, his website. I think the entry for this year is done, right? The next will start next year, March,
Yeah,
April.
it's probably be around Jan or Feb 2021.
Got it.
But there's a lot of free content all over, so you can probably check that out.
Yeah, make sure to check the YouTube link. And one last thing from Abhinav for to all the hustlers, designers, marketers, 2021, what would you like to say?
Take things into your own hands. Don't wait
Hmm.
for somebody else to do it for you.
All right. Thank you so much, Abhinav. Yeah.